Hello and welcome to the World Wanderers podcast, a proud part of the Wander Barn Podcast Network.
I'm Ryan.
I'm Amanda.
And we're your hosts.
We're a traveling couple and digital nomads taking you on our adventures as we explore locations, destinations, and careers.
Enjoy the show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the World Wanderers podcast. We are super excited that you guys are joining us for today's episode of the show, because today we are joined on the podcast by special guest Margaux Miller. As a global community builder, Margaux connects top talent worldwide through tech events, online programming, and pro bono initiatives. An advocate for women in tech, she founded the Manitoba Women in Tech Group and sits on the advisory board for Women Tech Global Network. She's passionate about remote work, and Margaux leverages LinkedIn during solo travels for networking, which we definitely need to talk about because that's super cool. She's also a startup enthusiast and hosted the Start Canada podcast and enjoys exploring new cities' startup scenes. Margaux's an avid reader and podcast enthusiast. She turns cities into a chapter of her diverse professional journey. So very excited about this conversation. And Margaux, welcome to the show today.
Hey, thank you so much. Always fun having a bio before you come on.
Do you know what? For so long, because we've been on the other side of it, and I always feel like it's so weird when somebody's talking about me when I'm sitting right here. So for so long, we didn't do that, but it actually makes editing so much easier to just do the bio with the guests.
I actually used to do it on the show that I had at one point too. So I hear you.
Okay. Yeah. Hopefully we didn't torture you too much for that 45 to 60 seconds.
No, that was a good one. It's only bad when someone like reads every university and certificate and thing that you have. I'm like, those bios, those are the worst. Yeah. That was okay.
Yeah.
It's like we've done a criminal record check as well.
Yeah, basically.
Awesome. Well, we always like to kick these off by asking where in the world our guests are. So we'll throw that question your way, Margaux. Whereabouts are you joining us from?
Yeah, this is an easy one right now. I'm actually back in my hometown in Winnipeg, Canada. I tend to travel like off and on, a few months at a time, come back for a bit. I'm not fully nomadic. And I really like it that way. The way I refer to myself is that I'm a remote professional, because I do have like a normal career, full-time position, but it happens to be fully remote. We are a global company that I work with. So we can be anywhere pretty much in the world, so long as we make our meetings often in the US time zone. And so, yeah, like I have a place in Winnipeg and I come home here and it's like really safe and nice. I came home on time for Christmas and then I'm here for a little bit. But before that was gone for 3 months in Europe, and it kind of goes in this pattern back and forth like that. But yeah, right now, nice and easy back in my hometown.
Yeah, no, that's so awesome. I really love the idea of like, having a home base and then being able to travel and stuff like that. So it's kind of what we did this past year, although yeah, Mexico is kind of our temporary home right now, but sort of, I guess, as permanent as it gets. I want to hear like so much about how this started. So I'm curious for you, is it like, were you into travel and you wanted to get a remote job, or did you get a remote job and then you're like, oh, cool, I can travel?
Yeah, good question. I think it was probably like a weird mix of both in a way. So historically, I always thought working remotely would be amazing, but I think I didn't realize the potential of it or how many roles out there that there were. I think I had this pressure feeling of like, well, if I had my own business, I could do what I wanted. But, within businesses, it was hard. Obviously, the world has been changing in the last few years where there's a little more flexibility in that. People see the value, like a lot of companies are realizing, but same time, we are seeing a lot of companies going back to pulling people back in the office. But so when I was first looking at this, I was always someone who grew up traveling. Really fortunate that my parents really encouraged it. They even took my brother and I to live in Australia for a year when we were teenagers. And again, we're Canadian, so that was a big move. And so we definitely were exposed to this, which gave us both the travel bug, very much so. And so we always were traveling, but I'd go on these trips and then I'd feel this pressure to like be back in the office Monday morning, and you'd be racing back on a Sunday night, paying the high price fee to get back, only to be like tired the next day anyway. Meanwhile, had I stayed somewhere and flown when it was like a good deal, I could have been like really fresh at work, been at those days, but just not physically at home, just on my computer. But I always thought, this is so silly. Wouldn't life be amazing if if I could just work from wherever I was, at least for a slightly extended period of time, like extend trips a little bit or whatever. So this is my mindset originally was just like slight stretch from what I had, right? Which was a normal in-office job. But then the pandemic happened and we all got sent home. And in that period, I realized that I was very capable of successfully like delivering on my projects, even when I was at home. Where some people, I know they've like tested that, had a really hard time. My output is still extremely high. In fact, maybe even higher because I am a social person. And then I'm not distracted by like the water cooler talk and all those things, long lunches, coffee, like going for coffee, whatever, right? When you're home, I just like work out in the morning, walk to my office and then in my house and then get to work immediately. So I realized I could do it. I did a really good job at it. And then I found the current job I'm at on LinkedIn. I read the description and thought, wow, this is a dream job, totally remote. And then but I wasn't necessarily searching only for remote jobs. I would have taken an in-person job at the time because my mindset hadn't fully switched. Now though, 3 years into that role, I can't imagine, like, I'm surprised I wasn't targeting it more actively, considering I had always felt burdened by like not being able to extend trips and all that stuff I was talking about. So yeah, it was a bit of like some weird hybrid of both. I always kind of knew there was a better option for me, but I didn't really know it was realistic or where to find it. Found this amazing job and it turned out like even more amazing because not only was it the function I wanted to be doing, but also was fully globally remote, which is quite rare. Like it's quite rare that you're fully remote and they don't care if you're outside your city, your province or country. It's really just up to me to know what Canada's tax rules are for that. But otherwise the company doesn't care so long as I make my meetings.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That's Ryan's job is very much like that too, which has been like a huge blessing for us to be able to continue our travels as well. I know I was talking with somebody the other day who's like, oh, she's like, I didn't realize that there was a difference from work from home jobs and remote work jobs, which I actually didn't know this either. So I just found this out like this week, where I guess she has like a work from home job. So she can't even like go to a Starbucks or like work from the airport. It's like that stuff has to be either like it's like PTO or like, you know, time off basically, or it needs to be approved. And I was like, huh, I'd like no idea that there was a difference in this. And it's also interesting. We were just down in Argentina and we went to this like American Thanksgiving event. And I was talking to this girl who not only works 2 jobs, both of her employers don't know she has another full-time job. So she's like doing some sort of like hacking the system there, but she's supposed to be based in Atlanta, Georgia. And so she's got this whole setup where she like wires into her like computer in the morning and she checks like the weather so she can dress appropriately for meetings and stuff. And I was like, dang girl, like that's you should just find a job that they like, you could just be
in a way good for her. But I feel like that's a risk, you know, and a lot of people aren't willing to take that or do that. But wow. And your comment earlier about the difference between work from home, I think that's a really important one to flag for people because I think there's this appeal to be working in the kind of roles that, you know, you mentioned Ryan has and I have, but yeah, you have to read the posting carefully because, and it might also say like US remote or Manitoba remote or, you know, like the province remote or whatever, in which case that likely means somewhere in between what you just said, which is you can be outside your home, but you can't be outside your city, province, whatever. And oftentimes they do that for information security, right? Like you'll have a VPN that you have to sign into and it's like really hard to sign into it if you're not like in a certain space and blah, blah, blah. So sometimes there's that kind of stuff that can put a blocker up. But
yeah. So much more ease and enjoyment comes from working with a company where like people do it and you don't have to feel kind of guilty or like you're being judged for being like, hey, I'm taking a flight this afternoon. I'll be back
or hide
tonight.
it or whatever. Yeah,
that's what I was thinking when I was talking with this girl. It was like so much of your like time and energy, like just like thought process, like RAM of your brain must go to like making sure that you don't get caught by these 2 jobs.
Yeah, your outfit example, even like adding that anxiety. When I'm home in Canada, I go for walks on the frozen river here in the winter every morning pretty much. And I listen to typically like a podcast or a shortened book on like one of those book summary apps or something like that. And I was listening to one this morning and it was basically saying that obviously we all know about habits, big conversation the last few years about developing good habits, right? And how that can lead to success. But it was talking about that and also like the mindset around them. And with this example that you're giving of someone who spends a lot of time on kind of, you know, quote unquote, the wrong thing, when you're constantly thinking about the same thing. So every day she wakes up and goes, I check the weather, I figure out my outfit, that becomes a habit. And then that just becomes like normal state where she has this like mini anxiety every morning of doing this thing, which starts your day then in this like anxious state, even if it's like subtle or slightly subconscious. I'm sure she's not like panicking every morning. She's got a routine now, but it's a routine like kind of for the wrong thing. And the book was also talking about how if you have habits, they just become like your normal life. So you don't notice you're doing it, and you can only have so many habits. And so you have to basically get rid of a habit to like a bad one in order to have the space to replace it with a good one. Because again, like we obviously all only have so much capacity and time in a day. So yeah, it is unfortunate, that kind of story, because you're putting your day immediately in the hands of kind of a like quote unquote negative or bad habit, right? And then you're like, this poor woman, I don't want to say that what she's doing is like totally wrong, but it's like we do all have this subconscious stuff that affects us, right? And there's tons of books and studies about habits and mindset and how it affects like the next thing you're doing and the next thing, and then ultimately affects every day of your life.
Yeah, totally. I think that that's a good point.
That was my takeaway too, of like, this must be just like a stressful life. Although the double, like 2 solid incomes would be quite nice.
Yeah.
It's like double income, 1 person, no kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's actually comical. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm
then
curious.
a freelancing kind of organization, and then you're allowed more than 1 gig because
Yeah,
you're
totally. I feel like there's just ways that you could like make that work where it's like you're not stepping on anyone's toes and you're potentially not going to get like fired on really bad terms.
like if you're a contractor or a freelancer working your own hours, you can work 80 hours a week if you choose to. Like they don't care as long as you get your work done. It's a different beast for sure.
Yeah, exactly. And so I'm curious for you, obviously, like pandemic happens, get a remote job, you're at home, we're all stuck at home, that type of thing. Then world starts opening back up. What did it kind of look like for you as you were like, hey, maybe I'll just take this job on the road? Like, can you talk us through like what that journey has been like as you've started to travel and that type of thing?
Yeah, that's been a really fun one. And it's been honestly really gradual. And I think that's another like really good piece of advice there. I think we see people really living these really like attractive lives. And, they're always traveling, or they're like 6 months somewhere, or they move so literally for a year, that kind of stuff. And maybe there's a barrier that people put up because that feels daunting, or it feels like I'd have to arrange so many things in my life to go over that long. Like that feels like a lot for me. Rather than do that to myself, I did this kind of gradual build. So when kind of the world opened up again, I was already at this role. So I wasn't totally taking advantage of what it had to offer. Kind of one day woke up and realized, wow, things are open now. I could probably be utilizing this freedom that I have a lot more. And so then I would just go on like a little bit longer trips. Like say a friend of mine in a different city in Canada had like an engagement party, or was, had a bachelorette or something, had a big birthday. I would go to that city, say Toronto, for example. And instead of just staying for a weekend, again, with like expensive flights and whatever, I'd realize, oh, I could just get a co-working space, or she's got a spare bedroom. I'll stay for an entire week and then just kind of work from there, and let's see how it goes. And it would go perfectly fine. No one would even know at work or notice or care, right? Because you're still at all your meetings, you're working normal days, you're just slightly different time zone. Mm-hmm. And then I would go for 2 weeks, and then, something else would come up and I'd go, okay, I'm going to be in Vancouver. Well, I wonder if I could also be in Seattle, like right across the border for a week after. Okay, cool. Yeah, that worked. That was easy. Okay, great. 3 weeks, 4 weeks. And then before you knew it, like last spring, I was in Mexico for 2 months, and I have some friends in this one city. So I picked there because I knew people. They had someone who had an apartment that I could rent. And then like just more recently, I was gone 3 months straight in Europe, and I'd have like maybe a speaking gig or an emceeing gig in there because I do that stuff on the side of my day job. So I kind of like build my trip around that. But you realize that like, okay, getting an Airbnb when you rent for a month or more, significant discounts. Like it doesn't even show actually, like advice to people. When you put more days, it'll give you a discount, but until you click and open it, you sometimes can't fully see it. It's actually something kind of weird with the user interface, if anyone's listening from Airbnb product. But when you click it, you end up seeing like quite a steep discount. So for example, to give someone an example, I just stayed for a month in Prague, Czechia, like right downtown and like right along the riverbank, close to the dancing house central area, 900 Canadian dollars.
What?
Entire month. Furnished place, like, right, it's great area. So this is what people like, I think. So anyway, I do all those things. And then it just made me like, there was just a comfort level that grew, right? And now I'm kind of like, how can I get the right visas to be out of the country for 6 months or a year, right? And not like break my citizenship and visas and get in trouble, right? So now it's like, my mindset gradually grew, and definitely I'm like more and more taking advantage of it. But currently I still do like to come home, be with my close friends and my family, have this safe space with my house. But that mindset's starting to shift as well. But yeah, I haven't had the desire to be like a total nomad living out of a suitcase. I have really liked this balance of a few months away, a few months with the people I love, a few months away, this back and forth. That's really worked for me. And I think everyone just has to find what works for them. But it's definitely been a gradual journey from like extending a weekend to a week to 3 months not feeling long enough.
Yeah. I was curious, did you grow up in Winnipeg?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm curious what it's been like kind of spending more and more time away from the city, and if you've noticed that's kind of impacted your relationships and social circle there.
So interesting, Ryan. That is a great question. I was like, people in my network would joke that I was Miss Winnipeg when I was in my early 20s. I literally love our city. I always have. I was super involved. I'd be on committees and running events and at every like gala and golf tournament and all this stuff, right? Like I was heavy involved in our city. I still very much am a supporter of Winnipeg. I think it's an underrated city that has a lot to offer, especially when like cost of living is great and we all have like summer houses and cabins because the cost of living is great and that and there's lakes everywhere nearby and like so summers are amazing. So there's a lot of really good. But to your question more directly about like relationships and what it looks like, it is interesting. It has made me feel slowly every time a little more disconnected from the city. I think that the world has a lot to offer, and I don't think that takes away from where you're from, but that's a common thing that people, a narrative that people use, I think by accident. I think people think it's cool to like say, oh, I was in Paris and it was so amazing. And oh, I wish my city was like that. But it's like, no, they offer different things. Like you can't live right downtown in Paris for the price you can in Winnipeg. And you can't, then have the disposable income to go to other cities like Paris that you can when you live here. So it's like, there's a million of those examples I could give you. I think that it's the biggest thing for me, which is a funny kind of totally different topic, Ryan, is that I am single. And the more that you travel, the more a smaller city that's like a little more traditional, like Winnipeg, feels very small in what you're looking for in the dating pool, which this could be a whole other podcast, but
Yeah, I can imagine like if you spent, like you said, you spent time in Guadalajara, like Guadalajara is like what, 6 million?
5 or 6
8
million
million, I
people.
think. Yeah.
Yeah, like it's a huge city. I'm sure there's just like so many more options.
Yeah. And in Europe, everyone's so international, like they understand that side of me a lot more easily. In Winnipeg, I think there's a lot more, or like smaller cities in Canada, US, whatever. Like it's not just Winnipeg, but there's a bit more of a mindset of like most people I know are in very serious long-term partnerships. They're married, they're having kids, right? Like I'm in my mid to late 30s. So it's like that's what you're seeing, right? So whereas when you're in busy, very metropolitan European cities or wherever in the world like that are more aligned to that, you have a lot of people who are on the same path. Like they might never have kids, are very career oriented. They've lived in 6 different countries. They speak 4 languages. Like that's really normal of what you're finding in people you meet, that you don't find a big group of those people in prairie cities. You just don't. It's just not as metropolitan, maybe the right word, but I don't know. It's not as much like that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I feel like when we kind of started our nomadic journey and we were probably only in Canada, like maybe 4 or 5 months of the year when we first started, we just come back for like the warmer months based in Alberta. So, I mean, you're from Winnipeg, so you're from a very cold place as well. But I'm always like, I'm from like the frozen tundra. I don't want to spend winter there. But I felt like just like the longer we did that, it's like, it's like so much time was passing and so many things were happening that we were missing. And I also feel like it's just like our lives were becoming so much different from our friends at home. Not to say that we don't have great friends at home, because we do. We have friends that we see, every year when we go back, and it's always really special and meaningful. But it just became like more obvious that it's like, we're not like kind of in the same social circle. Like we don't do things every weekend anymore because, we're not here most of the time of the year. And then our community got kind of based around other nomads. Like Becky, for example, is a great nomad friend of ours who's the person who connected us. And it's like you kind of just build a community of people who like get you a little bit more. So I'm kind of curious.
True.
Yeah. Have you started to build kind of your nomad community, quote unquote?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've always been someone who's okay with friendships evolving over time. So, especially because like after we lived in Australia when I was 14, we came back and there was a big group of people back home that were like in cliques. It was very much kind of like that mean girl era where you had to pick certain groups of friends, like very, stereotypical. And so I think we learned young that it was okay to change your friends because we kind of had to. We were forced to get friends when we went there to Australia for the year, and we were forced to kind of like re-pick groups of friends when we came back. And so I think like ever since that formative experience, I've been someone who was okay with a friend saying like, going a different direction or me going a different direction. And when my friends started to have kids and I wasn't in that path, like those friendships look different, right? They start to hang out with like other moms more than with you because you were their kind of like going out friend or their adventure friend, right? And so things start to evolve. as I'm for those who can't see because we're audio here, like I'm wearing a blazer right now, even though I am and I bring blazers when I'm traveling and with a carry-on only. Like I'm still a professional, and that's I'm a very business focused person, even though I'm in this lifestyle, they're not mutually exclusive. So I think there's a bucket for everyone. I have a lot of what I call business friends now, like women in business who are like me, where we've bonded over a like-minded drive and joy of networking and the joy of doing, go to business events. Not everyone likes that. So that's evolved for me. And I think this is just one more evolution in that, where it's kind of like your friends with kids and you start to lose them a little bit, but you still love them deeply. Mm-hmm. That's kind of, I would say that that's akin to this. My local friends in Winnipeg, I still love them deeply, but those friendships are starting to look a little different. And I am starting to lean into what was once my business friendships is now, my kind of travel business friendships. Other women who do public speaking, other women who are traveling and staying in co-living, co-working spaces, or, trying to take advantage of the opportunities available in this lifestyle, in women in tech, that kind of stuff. So yeah, there's definitely an evolution, and it's hard to balance because you feel a bit sad or guilty. Maybe guilty is the right word in a way, because you don't want people to think that you think you're better than them because you're living this travel lifestyle, because that's not what it is. No one's better than me for having a kid or not as well. It's not, that's not the bottom line. It's just that things start to look a little different.
Yeah, for sure. It's just shifting into different life phases, and sometimes it becomes challenging to keep up and stuff like that. So yeah, definitely get that. I feel like we've definitely had a lot of that. And I'm kind of curious for you, what it looks like when you're planning a trip. I mean, you're planning, as a solo female, so I'm curious, what considerations go in with that. And then when you're looking for Airbnbs, places to stay, I'm assuming probably proximity to co-working spaces, just all the planning that kind of goes into okay, I'm going somewhere for 1 to 3 months. And, this is what I need out of that trip.
Definitely, I would have lots of advice and tips for this. I think the first is, if you are a woman listening who is unsure, and even if you're young, way younger than me, I said my age earlier, but if you're in your early 20s and you're thinking I think I want to do this, but it seems intimidating as a woman by yourself, I would only tell you to do it. You will learn about yourself and grow, and you will meet a ton of amazing people, because when you don't have a friend shielding you, you work harder to make other friends, and those will be amazing friends. When I was in the UK just recently, I stayed with a friend in her house with her husband and 2 kids for 5 weeks. Can you believe it? They're very kind people. But I did that. And that woman was a friend I met when I was 21, backpacking in New Zealand. And we're that good of friends that I was able to do that now, 13 years later or whatever it was. So you're just going to win from that, from taking that risk, I would say. So that's the first thing. And then, okay, how do you plan so that you don't feel uncomfortable when you go? Well, there's tons of options there. If you are young still and you're good with hostels, go stay in a hostel, you'll meet a ton of people. But if you're trying to work and you need that quiet space and kind of the focus space, co-living, co-working spaces are something to look up. Literally look up those 2 words together, co-live, co-work. They're basically houses with numerous rooms in them, where maybe everything is shared kitchen, shared bathroom, shared common spaces, but you have your bedroom with a desk in it with high-speed Wi-Fi, and you can lock the door. And then there's usually a co-working space that comes with it. So an actual room with a bunch of desks or cubicles, or a space nearby and another space, another house or something nearby, where you can co-work. Again, guaranteeing good internet and all the plugs you need and all that stuff. Which brings me to the point of, when you're doing this lifestyle, you are not on vacation. And so there is a lot of work that you have to do to make sure that you're set up properly. So, sometimes when you search for hotels for a trip, let's say your path is using Expedia or looking up, I don't know, different deal websites for hotels. When you're looking for an extended period, I often use Airbnb because I like I was saying earlier, the rates you can get long-term and you can get a space. But I have to search by the word Wi-Fi, in my filters and keywords. That's one of the first things I'm looking for. I can't look at just price and location and leave that off my checklist. It's really, really high up there. And then you have to make sure that you're going a few days early to be able to test that Wi-Fi and see. And then if it's not strong enough for international video calls, which I have to do, then you need to find a co-working space that's nearby enough where you know the route and you know the transportation. Because come Monday morning, when your work starts, you better not have any interruptions. Because if you start to have interruptions, that's when your employer or your boss or whoever is not going to want you doing what you're doing. If you don't ever show a blip in your delivery, then they have nothing to complain about. They have no leg to stand on, right? And they will just genuinely also be okay with it, because you're proving that you're not going to let it interrupt your work. So I think there's a lot of factors there that I look at. With Airbnb, you can click a button that says, does it have Wi-Fi or not? Yes or no. And it'll only give you those options. But then my recommendation would be go into the comments and search internet, Wi-Fi with a hyphen, Wi-Fi without a hyphen, like try and get any reviews to come up in the comments, like reviews section that has to do with internet or Wi-Fi. And then that way you can kind of see and look at the date on them. If they're a few years old, they've probably fixed the Wi-Fi since then. But if they're somewhat recent and there's a comment about kind of like intermittent Wi-Fi, go to your next option, like don't take that risk, I would say, because even though co-working spaces are amazing to go into, there's plenty of days I just want to stay in my space and work and go to bed, and like have
it
my
sucks when you don't have the option to stay in your Airbnb to work.
Right, exactly.
Or you're like hotspotting data to make that happen. And it's like, I mean,
Totally.
when you're in other countries, it can be really cheap to do that, but it's still like such a pain in the butt.
Yeah.
I think Airbnb, you can verify Wi-Fi now. You can do like speed tests as the host and like verify what your Wi-Fi speed is, which is not every host does that. But I think if they're setting up
and they can
remote
send
work,
like a
it's like
screenshot in their pictures.
Yeah, then you could like see
or
what
you
it
can
actually
contact
is.
them. Yeah.
Because I hate when you like contact them and they're like, yeah, it's like really fast. And you're like, can you tell me how fast it is? And then they give you like numbers and you're like, that's not fast internet.
Yeah, right.
Awesome. Well, one thing I was curious about was what have been your favorites so far since you started kind of specifically working and traveling, favorite cities and regions, and then kind of going off that, like what's on your like the top of your list for places you want to go?
This is a funny question for me because I have always been a person who does not have favorites. Like anyone who knows me, this is a really funny thing. Even when I was young, I didn't have like band posters on my wall as a woman, as a young girl. I didn't have like a favorite band and a favorite, like, whatever food. Like I've just always been the kind of person who's like, well, today I want sushi, but I also love pizza and like, oh, Italian food, so good. Oh, Indian food, man, don't you like some good Indian food? Like my answer would never be a straight answer. I couldn't pick. So travel's kind of the same thing. I think my mind just goes to like recent places I had a great experience. And so I just mentioned Prague a minute ago. Fabulous experience there. It is a very well-priced city compared to a lot of other European cities, especially for like a big capital city. That's pretty neat. It's more like Central Europe, which I hadn't really done. I had done a lot of like the obvious European countries, a little more West. That was like a nice change for me. I definitely did not learn the language, but enjoyed really, really awesome people that I met there. And I think they have an appetite for meeting people from other countries like me who are trying to like integrate in the business community when I'm there and the startup community and support women in tech and that kind of stuff. Even like I ended up speaking at the Czech Chamber of Commerce when I was there because I met some of the right people and just said like, hey, this is what I do. Do you have a need for this? And they had like an appetite for it. So I think, it's all where I just like have had good experiences in recent days. But I also, right before that, was in Lisbon and loved Lisbon. And I was visiting some friends in the UK. And so I had friends there. So that was great. So it kind of is like, it's like my food example. I'm not good at giving a favorite, but there are a lot of amazing places in this world.
Maybe before you answer part two, I'll flip the question then. Has there been anywhere where you're like, this was not like, maybe like you don't hate it? Well, if you hate it, you could share that too. But maybe it's like, this just was like not a great place for the type of trip I'm looking for, like being a solo female, working and traveling.
Okay. Yeah. Fair. That's that I can maybe try and answer. Again, I'll find like a silver lining and like something positive about everywhere I go because it all helps you grow, right? And it all is a good experience in that way. But you guys are in Mexico and I was in Guadalajara, which we said before is like 8 million people. I was there in spring. I have good friends there and had a great experience. However, there were things I didn't expect. Inland Mexico or different places in Mexico, you definitely have to do your research. There are dangers. My close friends there, I was in a residential neighborhood. Like I was staying with a friend of a friend, renting a room off them. And so I was in like a nice, like safe seeming neighborhood. Like you could walk around, looked lovely. But all these shops I wanted to go to were across a railroad track and they wouldn't let me walk across it, not even in the day. And there was like a road and a sidewalk. Like it was a normal thing to walk across. You weren't like running across a field. But they were like, you are not allowed to walk across there, no matter what, even during the day. And then I did it a few times and then told them, and they freaked out on me. They're like, you can't walk. What are you doing? It's so dangerous. But it didn't appear dangerous during the day. But I guess this is where like you kind of need local guides. It's a little bit, there are dangers. And obviously, again, for people who can't see me, I'm a pale redhead, so I would stand out in these.
You're like 100% not Mexican.
Right, like
there are some redheads from Jalisco. That's where Canelo's from.
There you go. I mean, totally. There's people in every country that look every kind of way, and that's an amazing part of our world. But typically, I would stand out.
It's funny though, just to add one note there. I find it's one of the hardest things about travel. because you want to like respect what locals say and their advice, and that gets you lots of good places. But you also like basically everywhere has like that like don't go zone. Like it's like the Lion King elephant graveyard. I remember we were in Panama City, and if you talk to Panamanians from Panama City about Cologne, it's like, oh, if you go to Cologne, you're gonna die. Like you'll get robbed and die there. Do not go there. But then you talk to people, lots of people who go there. They're
You
like,
talk to foreigners and they're like, it was fine.
it's not nice, but like it's fine. You can
Right.
be there.
Right.
That's always like hard to know. Like,
It is hard to know. And I think you do have to make some of your own decisions and like obviously still listen and pay attention. Like I was still very vigilant when I crossed it. Like I wasn't willy-nilly crossing it, like, you know, chewing bubble gum and curling my hair. Like I was like walking, looking, had my phone in my hand with like my friend's number dialed just in case. Do you know what I mean? Like there's things you can do as a female solo traveler to still be like intelligent. Like having those phone numbers, having somebody, and if you don't, then you just don't go to those places. Like there are little things you can do. But to finish answering your question, the other thing about it was way dustier than I expected it to be, which I guess you should know because it's literally on like sand plains, essentially. It's like a city built on dirt and sand. But it was like I'd go for a run or even just like a walk. I'd walk to go get ice cream or something. And you'd come back and like your feet and like you couldn't walk in sandals. Your feet would be just like black. So I was really surprised. Like in a city, I wasn't expecting to feel like gritty all the time. And it's just like a lot of their houses don't have air conditioning. It's just like super common not to. So you kind of have your window cracked all the time. Then there were like tons of noises outside the window just because like the neighbor had cats that made tons of noise at night and dogs too. And there was a train nearby. And so it was like, I remember my first couple of weeks just thinking, I'm dirty and I'm not sleeping well because these noises. And then like, okay, you get over it. You get some earplugs, you wash your feet in the sink. You find a good way to stand on a stool and wash your feet. Like, do you know what I mean? Like whatever, you get a
You find some good tacos and you're like, okay, I get why people are here now.
Oh yeah. There was a food market at the end of my street and it was amazing. It was every Monday. They had this like big pop-up, like food truck kind of thing. And it was all the Mexican classics. And I just like ate churros by myself every Monday night, like a good
I love that. Yeah, Mexico is noisy though. My parents were just down in December and they're like, we want somewhere quiet to stay. And I was like, don't come to this country then. this whole country is not for you if you want somewhere quiet.
Different building materials, like different, I don't know, like leaving the window open, like you're gonna hear the noise. It's just kind of part of it. It's a lot of like density. Yeah. I also had like tons of wonderful experiences, but I think sometimes I just don't research that deeply. I'm like, I have a friend there, so I'm going to go and it's going to be great. And then you kind of go, okay, like I think in Canada, we definitely we take it for granted how free it is here, how safe it is here. And so there, it was a little bit of a reality check of like, oh, there are people that live differently. Like it's, you know, and you have to be a little more careful, but
yeah, you have to be more thoughtful when you leave your house, especially if you're living by yourself. And I think especially as a woman.
Yeah. And so I think if you are a solo female traveler, you know, kind of looping in some of our questions together here, there's things you can like intelligently do to prepare. And there's probably lots of content on that. And we could have a whole other episode on that too, I'm sure, Amanda.
Yeah. Yeah. And so looping back to Ryan's part 2, do you have any bucket list places that you want to go or anywhere that's on your radar that you're really excited about?
Yeah, gosh, I want to go to so many places. I literally want to go everywhere in the world, but I'm also not going to hop around a ton of times within the same like short trip. So if, for example, like we were saying before, if you go somewhere for a month, you get a deal. And it's also like, by the time you get to know a city, it takes you minimum 2 weeks to, you know, start walking around without Google Maps in your hand and knowing where the bakery is that you really like and, you know, all that kind of stuff. And so yeah, I could check off 10 countries in one trip to Europe in a month, but also if you're working, don't put that burden on yourself. Like that's a tip I probably should have given earlier as well. If you are traveling and working, like stay somewhere for a month, I highly recommend it. You get to really experience that place, embrace it, maybe make some like actual friends and contacts, not feel like, you know, lonely in that sense. Like there's all these benefits. So like that's a big tip. But as far as places that I really want to go, I would really like to travel, and maybe this is a vacation, I don't know, but to Jordan, to Petra, to see Petra. So that's like high on my list. And then there's like some neighboring countries around there that I would love to go see. It's not like maybe an ideal time to go to some of those neighboring countries right now, but that they've been high on my list. I don't know if I would work from those like time zone wise, but yeah, been on the radar. But gosh, there's so many places.
Do you have anything planned for like later in 2024?
Yeah, I have a bunch of like small things. So, like I briefly mentioned, I've been leaning into emceeing and public speaking a lot more since having the podcast, and I've done a bunch of voice work and stuff. It's been like a really awesome journey over the years. And so I will be emceeing a community conference. So I'm a community builder by day, which you briefly mentioned in my bio. And so I'm going to be emceeing a community conference in London, England by a group called Led by Community. And that'll be awesome. And then in the spring before that, I'm going to Atlanta. I'm going to Latvia. I'm speaking at a conference in Latvia in April, actually, called Tech Chill, which should be really cool. And then in the fall, one of my good friends is having a big milestone birthday and she's renting a villa in Italy. So I'm going to pop out there. And then after, it's the week before Oktoberfest. So I got to go to Oktoberfest because I'm already there. And then the following week, there's this big innovation week in Prague, back in Czechia. So I think I'm going to pop back there. And then in between all that, who the heck knows? But there's like the world's our oyster. But so it's a little different. They're not like really big chunks right now, but I think probably I'll extend a lot of it. Like if I'm going to go to the UK for that community conference anyway, then, why not stay for the whole month kind of thing? And those are the funny sentences that we can say when we have the lifestyle that we have. Like, why not just stay for a month if I'm going for a day? Is what we're allowed to say.
Yeah, no, 100%. I feel like now it's so hard for me. Like, we just went to Hawaii for 2 weeks just to see like to visit Ryan's family. And I feel like it's like such a long trip from Mexico. It's not that far from Canada, but it was pretty long for us with a toddler. And I was like, I feel like just going for 2 weeks just feels like we've like wasted this like long, kind of expensive flight. Like we should really be like,
weird how our narrative has changed with that.
Yeah. Like we were like, should we just go to Japan from here? Like we're basically halfway there.
Right. Which is like
who thinks that?
I know, but we say that. It's totally true. And you know what? And it's so funny because I'm going to catch myself because I'm like, my friends I'm talking to back home, like all they would possibly get is a 2-week holiday. And that would be long for them. And some companies even only allow you to go for like a week at a time, So it's so strange to like catch yourself, but I am exactly the same way. If I don't stay for at least a month, I'm like, was that worth my money for that expensive flight? Which is wild, but I don't know. Maybe there's a happy medium in the way we should think about it, because here's the other side of the coin. This all sounds fun and it sounds like we're a bit spoiled, but I often, like last year, I actually only took 5 actual days off, like proper holiday days, because I'm going to all these cool places and it kind of feels like you're traveling and you're on vacation. And so and on the weekends, I'm doing all these cool things. So I kind of forget that I haven't like taken actual days off. So there is kind of like a potential risk of like buying too much into this lifestyle and like not noticing. I actually got to a point where I all of a sudden was like, I got to take some days off. I risk burning out if I don't, because traveling around also takes a lot of energy, like resettling in your new space, doing all those checks I talked about earlier, making sure your Wi-Fi is good, getting everything ready. You're kind of working a little bit on like weekends when you do that. Travel days can be stressful, depending if you have a good routine going. And so it was like very go, go, go. And then I didn't realize I had done that. And so I had to like pull back and go, okay, this year, when I go for my friend's birthday in Italy, these kind of things, I'm actually going to take a week off work, because I could work in the villa still when they're out doing something during the day and meet them at night. And my brain almost wants to do that. It's like it's almost a bad habit of working too much now, so there's this real 2 sides of the coin when you have this freedom. Has that ever happened to you, Ryan, where you like forget, or am I just kind of a workaholic apparently?
No, I definitely find you have to do a lot more work to like separate work and life when you're working from home, which I find co-working spaces can be good for that for me. But yeah, it's funny because we had a lot of experience just traveling before, doing the like work, save money, sell everything, go travel. And I found myself kind of craving that a bit after a while, where you kind of have in your mind working and traveling will be the best of both worlds. It's like definitely you can get into situations where you're working too much and so you're not enjoying your travels. And then when you're doing your travel stuff, you're thinking about work and you feel like, oh, you're not doing kind of either to their like maximum expression.
Yes. That's well said. I definitely am facing that and still like learning how to do it properly.
Yeah. I think it can also be tiring too, because it's like if you have, we're definitely on the same page with like having at least a month somewhere if we're working full time. Because I feel like we learned early on, I think it was like our first digital nomad adventure. We went over to Asia and I think we spent a week in Singapore and then like a week in the Philippines. And then we got to, I think, Malaysia after that. And we had like 3 weeks or something in Kuala Lumpur. And we were like, this is amazing. We have so long, we can settle. I think just on that trip, we were like, okay, a month is kind of like our minimum if we have to work the whole time. Because it's like you want to spend so much time outside of your work hours doing things, which means you're like out in the evenings, you're out on the weekends. And I love that. But I also like just hanging out at home sometimes, right? Like
Yeah.
just chilling in my pajamas, having a slow Saturday. But I feel like if I'm like, I have 4 weekends and this is all the stuff I want to do, I feel this pressure to like go, 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 which, like you said, it kind of risks burnout because it's like you're hustling to work and then you're like also hustling to explore.
Yeah, I think you've said that so well, and it's actually really interesting to hear somebody else articulate it because, like, the both of you, because it's absolutely what I face and how I feel. So I have to imagine, like, many people in our situation, in our really wonderful situations, are also facing that, which can be kind of the downside. And I bet you people who are thinking about this lifestyle are thinking like, "Oh, woe is me." But yeah, you do have to really be careful because you can just burn yourself out, and that's a real thing, and it can suck. And so I think it's like we you have to, I mean, listen to these things and take it seriously and like try and pay attention to where that balance is. And I agree with you. I'll go somewhere even for a week and work the whole time if I'm not careful. And then you will have like literally seen nothing, or you'll just be at your max capacity.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, one last thing I kind of wanted to pick your brain on that's related to this, because I feel like I kind of mentioned, I can't remember if we'd hit record or not. 2023 for us was very much like we're settled in Mexico, but I think we figured out we traveled like 4.5 months out of Mexico the year. So we did a couple of big trips. It's kind of the first big trips that we did with our daughter outside of taking her back to Canada when she was little. But I'm curious for you kind of what that's been like in terms of like you have this house that you're responsible for, like how you kind of balance like leaving the country and leaving all your stuff and then coming home, like logistically, like do you have people who are coming to stay at your house? Do you rent it out? Do you have people come to check it? Just like
Yeah.
lock and key, like hope everything goes well. Like I'm kind of curious the logistics of like I'm a homeowner, I have the responsibilities of a home, which is beautiful when you come home and you get to just like hang out, but then also while you're away, like how you kind of coordinate all of that.
Yeah. It is absolutely so wonderful to come home to like a safe space with all your stuff, with a big comfy couch, with your blankets and all your clothes and all your things. It's very nice. But it definitely can be stressful or like cause anxiety to look after a place when you're not at home. I think actually more likely than being stressed, what happens is I fully forget about it. And then that's also not great because stuff does start to fall apart on a house, especially when you're only home for like a couple months at a time and you want to just like see your friends when you're at home and then you leave for a few months. Eventually you start to notice major things in your house that need to be done, which is kind of what I faced this last time coming home. So typically when I'm gone, I've been very lucky. I've had a couple friends stay in my house, even potentially paying like a small fee to be there. I think you can just get lucky sometimes of like people break up often who live with partners. And sometimes this sad news coincides well with one of my trips. And then
You're like, oh, your divorce is so convenient. No, I'm just joking. Of course, we don't celebrate those things.
No, I mean, sometimes we do. Sometimes
yeah. I guess circumstantially, of course.
Yeah. So I've been really fortunate with things like that happening. Well, that's such a weird thing to say, really fortunate, but the timing has been nice where everybody won in those situations. So that's worked. I also have had, like, historically, I had little cousins who were still living with their parents who were just super happy to be out of the house. So there was no money exchange. It's just like you had someone looking after your place. Like it would cost me more technically because they're using the water and stuff, but like for the safety of having someone in your house in case the, winter pipes break or whatever, that was always good. If those things were both not possible, I do have family in town, lots of family. And so my parents or someone else will come like check on the house every few days. You should check your insurance policy if you're going to do that. In many places, like in Canada specifically, most insurance policies will be void if you do not have someone in the house every 3 days. Some are 2 days, some are 4 days. But literally, like if a pipe breaks, which like my grandparents' house, one time my brother was looking after it, the toilet on the second floor cracked and water was coming through the floor, just random. Like the toilet just cracked. Like it wasn't winter. There was no reason. It just was like, it just happens sometimes. And had he not gone in the garage, like he checked a bunch of the house, it all looked fine. And then before he left, he checked the garage and there was water coming through and he noticed. And had he not done that and like gone to the house, and it would have been more than the 3-day period, which they can tell because like how much damage has been done and whatever, or they check the alarm, because if you have an alarm, they can see when the code's been punched in. That's a very easy way for insurance to check. And so it would have been like flooded, wrecked the floor, and they would have just had to pay for everything. There would have been no insurance claim. So really knowing your policy is super important. Actually having like some kind of proof that someone's come check on it
That's a
is
really good pro
important.
tip.
Like
I
as
never would have
lame
thought
as
of
that sounds. I know, and most people don't do that or even know that. We only found out from some of these things happening to people. So it's very frequent that you actually have to have someone there. My parents actually just checked their policy because they're going on a trip right away too, 4 days for them. So really, really important. But all of that can, and if you're not in a city with all your family and friends, like there's things you can do. There's property management companies. You could like Airbnb or rent it, but then again, you probably need someone to like manage it, change the sheets and clean it and like make sure they check in fine and all that stuff. Like there's a big burden to renting it out like that, because people might be listening thinking like, why don't you make money while you're gone? And it's like, yes, but that also is a lot of work. And like, is the amount of work and stress of managing that worth the intake you're going to get? For some people, maybe they need that, but depending on, and like, let's not like, we can all need that. Like we all would want that nice extra income, but there's a lot of stress that can come with it. So yeah, there's a lot of decisions you have to make. Typically, I'm pretty light on that. I live pretty cheap when I travel in order to be able to do what I do for as long as I'm going and not have a ton of stress of like trying to rent my place every single day. Cause that can be really hard when your trips are kind of ad hoc.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's so much like consideration that goes into if you're going to have people you don't know stay in your house. Like, I'm assuming all your clothes are in your closet and your dresser. Like, you don't really want somebody like in your room, like going through your underwear drawer, right? Like, there's a lot of work to like prepare a house to be Airbnb, to be rented. And then, that's on top of like having somebody who can check them in or making sure you have a good system, making sure you have a cleaner that can come and turn things over, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So I think it's definitely like an option for people to explore, right? But I think it's not just as simple as like, I have this house, like come rent it on Airbnb.
I know some people who do it and they get super successfully and like love it and they pay for everything by Airbnb in their house every day they're gone, but they're also in like pretty hip cities and I am not. So that makes it a little more difficult.
Yeah. I was just gonna say too, then there's a whole extra series of additional problems that can become headaches if you have other people living there, especially Airbnb, people coming in and partying or whatever.
Totally. Like imagine you're trying to like set up your Wi-Fi in your new place and navigate to your co-working space because Wi-Fi is not working. And then someone's messaging you being like, hey, your toilet's not working at home. Like,
yeah.
Okay.
The Wi-Fi is not working at the other place.
Yeah. At your place you were supposed to set the person up with. Yeah, exactly.
When we were just in Hawaii, I was like messaging with like 2 different plumbers, one for like the house we're renting and one for the apartment, and being like, hey, trying to manage like multiple plumbers and multiple plumbing issues.
You're like, which one are you again?
Yeah. And neither was like serious, thank God. Like there was nothing that was like seriously happening. There was a tiny leak in the property we own, and there was just, we're having an ongoing issue we live in like an old Mexican house. So it's just like an ongoing issue, but it's just like, we're like, how is this like happening right now? We're like, Hawaii, we've got 2 separate plumbing issues trying to coordinate 2 plumbers, which is like a whole thing in and of itself.
But I feel like that's the thing, right? People would joke like, well, that would never happen at the same time. Like, what are the chances? But it's like, actually, be surprised the amount of stuff that goes wrong. And like renters are allowed to complain about absolutely anything they want to. Like there's a black mark on my sheet. Like it's probably like it's probably a marker mark, but they're like, they don't want to sleep in that sheet. So now someone has to go clean it. It's like, they have the right to complain about technically whatever they want to that day. So yeah, there's pros and cons to both. And obviously everyone can figure out what's right for them. I've done it pretty like low lift so far, but the more I go for longer periods, the more that I'm in this like tough spot now of deciding, do I still want the house? Real estate's really great. And it's nice to have that safe place to come home to, but a whole house to myself can be a lot of maintenance when I'm home. And then that's kind of like, you're just constantly feeling like you're doing too much responsibility when you're home. But like renting it the whole time, we just talked about a lot of difficulties with that kind of stuff. Maybe you just pay a property management company and you just eat that 10% that it is to pay them, because like you basically will break even, like you won't make a ton of money, but at least you keep the equity of the home. So, okay, that's kind of a good option. Or maybe I just sell it, which is like definitely crossing my mind a lot lately, but I go back and forth. Like one conversation I'm on one side. What's that?
It's a good time to sell in Canada right now, it seems.
Oh yeah, there's options. See, look, you can even tell my voice. It's like, it's a stressful thing to make these big decisions. And this is where like earlier I was talking about, you work your way up, from square one of like extending trips to going for months at a time. And now I'm at that point where it's like, I haven't been able to mentally cross the bridge of getting rid of all my stuff in house.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, I have this barrier there. Maybe you and I can talk about it offline, because I know you have kind of made that bigger move to Mexico. I need someone to tell me like, getting rid of all your stuff is fine. You'll be fine. Like it's a mental thing more than anything else.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. I definitely get that.
One thing I wanted to ask Margot was when you're going new places, how do you kind of plan and kind of set yourself up to get to know people there, both professionally and personally?
Yeah, love this question because I use LinkedIn, which most people do not use, I think, when they're trying to like make friends in a new city. Partly it's because, like I said, I like business events and I like startup events and I like those communities. I like the women in tech community. And you can find all those things really easily through people's LinkedIn profiles because people have really great information on there now. So typically what I'll do is look up a few things. So I might go to like people actually put a lot of events on Facebook still, you'd be surprised, or Eventbrite, very common like event website for ticketing, right? So I'll go on those or I'll just Google search like Prague women in tech events between these dates or, London startup events between these dates. And I find the set of stuff going on. Then I'll look at whose names are attached to that event. Usually there'll be like an organizer name, like the person's name or an organization's name. But oftentimes there's actual people. They'll be like, our speakers are these 3 speakers. And I'll look and I'll often see like a speaker or two, say there's one event, say it's like a women in tech breakfast. And I see 3 female panelists and then the event organizer. I will message all 4 of them on LinkedIn privately, like you can easily find them. They've got their name there and their company. So I go to LinkedIn, type in, Linda on LinkedIn, find the person, send the message saying, hey, I'm coming to town. I plan to come to your breakfast. Like if it's a free event too, like you're going to mingle and meet people at that event. So you've already found an event with a community you like. And if you're not a business person, use a different example. Go find a soccer event or a football event or something, right? There's probably like a breakfast for like some local fundraising soccer team or whatever. You'll find something, right? And a lot of them often are free again. But even if they're not, like if it's the right group for you, maybe it's worth you paying the lunch fee or whatever. So I'll message them saying, hey, I'm coming to your city. I'm from Canada, but I'm, a big advocate for women in tech. I work in tech. This is what I do. Like tie it in. Like, why are you relevant to them? And then I'll say, I'm planning on coming to your breakfast and would love to maybe like meet you in advance or like make sure we connect at the breakfast because I think we have like shared interests, whatever. And it like a really clear, good call to action. Why should they care? Why would they like you as well? Like what's in it for them kind of thing. Make it a good, concise message. It's led to so many wonderful connections and opportunities. Sometimes I can't go to the event. I'll say like actually literally what happened in Prague was I said to this one lady, hey, I'm actually going to miss your breakfast. It's the day before I arrive, but I love all the things you stand for, XYZ. Here's our connection information. Is there any other event you have while I'm in town? So is there any other event you have while I'm in town? Here's my dates that I could attend or speak at. Here's my background, because I already said earlier, I like doing that side of things, right? And when you're speaking at something, now your name's out there, you make a lot of connections because people see you, they want to know who you are. Why are you here from this other country? So oftentimes the person will write back and give you an event happening that you can go to that's to a great fit. And sometimes they will even put you on stage, which is why I ended up speaking at the Czech Chamber of Commerce when I was there, because I sent 4 LinkedIn messages.
That's awesome.
Nice.
That's such a creative way to network. Like, I feel like there's so many platforms now and, so many Facebook groups and, I feel like when people ask me, I'm like, oh, digital nomad Facebook groups, like that's the best way to meet, or like expat Facebook groups, which I still think are great options. But I really love this way of like meeting people, especially with what you're doing. Like it's a great way to connect with, other women in tech. And also I love that you're putting yourself out there for like, hey, do you have events and maybe opportunities for speaking? Because that's also something you're passionate about.
Yeah. And it's a subtle sentence. Like I'm not saying it's only why I would go. I still want to go to the breakfast anyway. But it's like some people will hook on to that and they'll have something coming up where they're like, oh, actually, we could use someone who's not from here because we always have that same MC or we always have the same speakers. It's like you this cool person out of town for a bit. They can see my background on my profile, right? So it's like they know. But yeah, I would call this more like targeted networking because if you are only somewhere for a period of time, there's amazing, like you say, there's amazing nomad connection groups and Facebook groups for different city like activities. Again, if you love soccer or singing or you love whatever, like you can find a group everywhere. So that might be a better avenue for some people. But I want to meet like the person who runs the group and like go for coffee with them and know what they know about how to plug into that thing, whatever it is, even if it's a fun activity. Again, like it doesn't have to be business. I just think it goes so much further. And so many people in our world are really willing to help one another. And so I've had some people say like, hey, no, there's no other events, but would love to take you for coffee. There's this cool coffee shop. It's local. It's near here. Do you want to come meet sometime? You say yes. Now you have this like the person who was going to be speaking at the event is now your like personal coffee meeting, as opposed to just like you're one of many people in the audience of this event. Like to me, I'm so surprised more people don't do it. And maybe this will help some of us.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I love that. Amazing. I feel like we've covered so much. I feel like we could keep picking your brain, but I feel like we've covered so much stuff. I feel like here seems like a good place to wrap up. So I'm curious, do you want to share with listeners where they can go to find you if they want to connect with you, follow you, get to know you? I don't know, hire you for a speaking gig, something like that. Where can they do all of that?
Thanks for the plug. Yeah, I was just talking about LinkedIn, so let's start there. It's just Margaux Miller. Oftentimes on a lot of my profiles, I have Margaux A. Miller, so for my middle name, but Margaux is spelled funny. If you're trying to find me, it's Margaux, like Margaux in France. So Margaux Miller, and that's on like pretty much everything. I'm most active on LinkedIn, Instagram, and then maybe X after that, but pretty much those two are my main ones. But you can find me on pretty much all of them, and I will answer your messages. But yeah, try me on LinkedIn or Instagram first, and definitely just DM me if you have questions or want to connect or have an event in mind. Yeah, this is all really fun part of being part of this global community that the two of you are nicely featuring here. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll make sure there's links to all that in the show notes. And yeah, thank you so much for your time today. This has been such a fun conversation.
Thanks, Margaux.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode. If you want more, make sure to check out The World Wanders Insider, available on Patreon at patreon.com/theworldwanderers.
For show notes, head over to theworldwanderers.com. Find us on social media at The World Wanderers Podcast and join the private Facebook community at World Wanderers, a community for travelers.
You can always get in touch with us at info@theworldwanderers.com. And if you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. It really helps us find new listeners.
See you next time.